Good afternoon. It is News Radio 1029 KARN. I am your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KARN is the phone number. 501-403-5276 if you would like to join the conversation, be a part of anything we're talking about today. Of course, it is the big news of the day. O.J. Simpson passed away, age 76, as I understand it. He died of cancer. He'd been battling for a couple of years now. Of course, all of the people my age remember O.J. from the famous white Bronco chase. Everybody my parents' age remember him as the Juice playing in the NFL. Everybody my children's age don't really know much about him at all. And so O.J., a man of many generations, you could say. There's been some interesting mixed reaction from many folks in the world of media and folks that knew the story, of course, that were alive and around and a part of the media at the time of the big murder trial and all of that. I've seen a few folks basically say, good riddance, glad he's dead, glad he's finally gone and we don't have to hear about his nonsense anymore. I've heard others say, tragic life that could have been so much more and it was wasted. And there's been a very, very interesting review. I guess for me, I don't really care one way or the other. I wasn't old enough to remember OJ playing football. I was old enough to remember the white Bronco chase. I was old enough to remember the trial. But again, it wasn't anything that affected my life. I was, dealing with everything else that was going on in my life at the time. I believe I was just graduating high school or very shortly before, or something like that, kind of dealing with my own life, figuring out who I was and didn't really care too much about what was going on with OJ. Then, of course, along comes the kidnapping and armed robbery trial where he was trying to steal back, I guess, some memorabilia that somebody had stolen from him, and of course ended up in jail for that. But again, it was one of those things where I didn't really care too much. I didn't really follow the story at all. So I'm curious to hear from you. One of the things we'll get into today, and I don't have a lot of information on this on my show sheet. I didn't do a bunch of research on the history of OJ because, like I said, it just wasn't really something that was in my personal purview over the last 20 or 30 years. So I'm curious to hear from some of you. What are your thoughts on it? I mean, is this are you with some who say good riddance, glad he's gone, and glad he's transferred over into the afterlife? Or do you feel bad? I mean, were you a fan of OJ when he played? Are you old enough to remember him playing and being the Juice, as they used to call him? We'll get into that. We'll ask a few questions about that today. One of the stories we got into yesterday, of course, was about Brian Malinowski and the ATF, the White House announcing and Kamala Harris announcing this new gun task force or gun safety task force or Office of Gun Safety or whatever stupid thing they're doing in the White House. Last night, there was a great debate by Spike Cohen and, of course, David Hogue. Those who don't know who David Hogue is, he was the kid that became famous after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting at the school. Spike Cohen has been a go-to commentator for many in the media about the issues of liberty and libertarian ideology. He's also started an organization called You Are the Power over the last couple of years, and we actually had him on the show the other day. They had a debate. David Hogue and Spike Cohen had a debate yesterday. about the issue of gun violence. And interestingly enough, all of them, or both of them, I should say, and the debate itself, the unlikely star was a woman named Lily Tang Williams. Lily Tang Williams is a Chinese immigrant. She escaped communism in China and came here to the United States, and she kind of overshadowed them both in her statement about gun control. And so we'll talk a little bit about gun control on some of this, but essentially, Lily Tang Williams's argument, or her point in the debate, she asked David Hogue. She said, "Can you guarantee me that the United States government will never become a tyrannical, authoritarian government?" And of course, David Hogue, in a very rare moment of honesty, said, "No, I can't guarantee that." And she said, "Well, then the gun debate is over. No more to talk about." Because the gun debate has never been about the sale of 30-round magazines or sporting weapons or hunting or any of that. The gun debate, the debate about the Second Amendment, as those who understand history know, has always been about self-defense and has always been about your right as citizens to protect yourself from any threat. Whether it is a threat of violence from a fellow citizen, or whether it is the threat of violence from your government, or the threat of violence of a foreign enemy. It doesn't really matter. You have the right, according to the U.S. Constitution, in the Second Amendment, and in the founding document of the Declaration of Independence, when Thomas Jefferson illustrated or iterated, I should say, so well, that we are, as human beings, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And so we'll talk a little bit about gun control today. We'll get into that. We'll talk in kind of in conjunction with or reaching back to what we talked about with Malinowski yesterday. There's some undercover video out now from this Sound Investigations, where a former CIA he's like a procurement officer or something like that, or he works within Homeland Security and was a former procurement officer with the FBI, basically bragging about how some FBI raids and things like that were simply staged, that it was the FBI that was essentially encouraging people to engage in various behavior so that they could have a reason to go after them and destroy their livelihoods and their careers and all of that. And so we'll get into some of that discussion as well. And it ties in a little bit to what we're talking about with the story there here in Little Rock with the former director of the airport as well. In addition to that, as it relates to the FBI, another thing you ought to know about is a report just the other day. I believe this came out Monday, and I've had it on the show sheet for a few days, but we keep getting into other things. But a public safety group that is made up of law enforcement officials and various analysts and things, they're claiming that the violent crime rates are actually much, much higher than the figures that are being reported by the current FBI. And so one has to ask, why would the FBI want to report lower numbers than we're actually seeing? And it then also calls into question what other statistics, what other information that has been reported to us by the FBI is untrue or untrustworthy. So we'll get into that along with some of the other discussions. And speaking of gun control and David Hogue, a new report out based on FEC filings and some of that kind of stuff. His political action committee that he has been raising money to the tune of about $3.5 million has been funding a fairly lavish lifestyle for him and not really doing much at all to actually fund campaigns and things like that he claims it has been doing. So David Hogue, grifter extraordinaire, in the news for a couple different reasons this week. So we'll get into that as well as a whole lot more, and we will talk about it all next as we continue on the Schmidt Show here on News Radio 102.9 KRN. And just a quick reminder, if you are watching us over on the stream, whether it's on Twitter, on YouTube, or on our website, you'll have to join us on the actual broadcast, which is, of course, live on the radio or through the app on your phone, or even just clicking on our website and the Listen Live link. But that's where we're going to have that conversation as we continue in just a few moments on KRN.